I remember the acrid taste of ash in my mouth the moment I truly grasped the meaning of hunger. It wasn't the familiar, empty gnawing of a missed meal, nor the hollow ache of rationed supplies endured during a long siege. This was true hunger, the kind that devours not merely flesh, but hope itself. It was the hunger that strips away every preconceived notion of survival, of death, of what it fundamentally means to be human, in a vast, indifferent galaxy that cares nothing for your existence. My name is Mordian Vex, once an Astro Militarum lieutenant of the 47th Cadian Shock Regiment, and a solitary survivor of the consumption of Hive-World Meridian Prime. I say once, because rank holds no meaning when you are the sole voice left to speak for 37 billion souls who shrieked their last as they were digested alive. And I say survivor because somehow something allowed me to draw breath when everything around me became sustenance for abominations that should not, by any stretch of sane reality, exist. This is not a chronicle of heroism, nor a stirring account of last stands against impossible odds. This narrative isn't about the glory of the Imperial Guard or the righteousness of our Emperor's cause. No. This is about the terrifying reality of an entire civilization becoming prey to something so utterly alien, so fundamentally other, that our very language fragments in the futile attempt to describe it. This is about witnessing everything you have ever known, everything you hold dear, vanish into mouths that, quite literally, never stop chewing. The first ominous sign emerged 3 weeks before the very sky above Meridian Prime began to bleed. Astropath Terminus Yala, a woman whose mind bridged worlds, suddenly erupted in screams that echoed ancient, forgotten languages. Languages predating human speech itself. She clawed frantically at her augmentic eyes until the servos sparked and her fingernails came away bloody and torn. Within hours, the other psychers in the choir followed suit, their collective agonizing shriek reverberating through the soaring spires of Hive Secundus like a mournful funeral dirge for the living. We, in our ignorance, believed it to be a chaos incursion. We braced ourselves for demons and cultists, for the familiar, insidious madness of the warp bleeding into reality. How utterly naive we were. How blessedly, terrifyingly naive in our limited understanding. The orbital defense platforms, our vigilant guardians in the void, detected them first. Massive, silent shadows moving with unnatural speed between the stars, blotting out entire constellations that had guided human ships for millennia. At that immense distance, they possessed an almost ethereal beauty. Graceful leviathans, they seemed to swim through the cold void with a singular purpose that felt almost divine, or perhaps blasphemously predestined. Admiral Korath of the Imperial Navy, ever bound by protocol, described them clinically as unidentified xenoform vessels and immediately ordered the standard protocols. Hail them. Demand identification. Prepare for hostile contact should they fail to respond. They never responded. They never slowed. They never, not by a single degree, deviated from their inexorable course toward our world. The first bioships entered our system like a plague made manifest, each one larger than our grandest cathedrals, colossal and ominous. Their organic hulls pulsed with veins of sickly, bioluminescent fluid, casting an unwholesome, greenish light across their armored, chitinous surfaces. They moved with the fluid, predatory grace of deep-sea leviathans, utterly silent in the vacuum of space, utterly focused on their grim destination. Our operators tracked hundreds, then thousands, then tens of thousands of these monstrous creatures as they formed a vast, living net around Meridian Prime, a suffocating embrace of alien biology. Governor Malthius, adhering to millennia of human military doctrine, ordered the population centers sealed, emergency rations distributed, and militia units activated. The same ingrained responses humanity had employed against Xenos threats for 10,000 years. As if procedure and protocol could possibly matter when facing something that existed far beyond our comprehension of warfare, beyond our very understanding of what war itself could truly be. I was stationed in Hive Tertius when the first spores began falling. Not the massive, thunderous drop pods we had braced for, but tiny, almost imperceptible specks of organic matter that drifted down like snow made of flesh. Each spore was no larger than a human fingernail, glistening with a viscous moisture that caught the artificial light of the hive's exterior lumens, giving them an unsettling, almost beautiful sheen. The tech adepts who meticulously analyzed them reported genetic patterns unlike anything recorded in Imperial archives, self-replicating cellular structures that seemed specifically designed to break down and consume any organic matter they encountered with terrifying efficiency. Within a mere 6 hours, the first victims were discovered. Hivers who had been caught in the initial spore fall, their bodies partially dissolved from the inside out. Their flesh had been consumed in unsettlingly geometric patterns, leaving empty, cavernous spaces where organs had been liquefied and absorbed. Yet, they were still alive, still agonizingly conscious, still screaming through throats that had themselves been partially digested, begging for the sweet release of death through mouths that leaked the same sickly, bioluminescent fluid we had observed pulsing through the bioships in orbit. That was the horrifying moment we truly understood. This was not an invasion. This was a harvest. The true feeding, the main event, began at dawn on the third day. I watched, a helpless spectator, from the observation deck of Command Bunker Primus, as the sky above Hive Secundus erupted with movement. It was not the familiar, reassuring thunder of drop pods or the piercing scream of atmospheric fighters, but a living, swirling storm of creatures that defied every tactical manual ever written. Gargoyles, their forms roughly the size of small aircraft, descended in perfect, terrifying formations, their wings beating with mechanical precision. Larger, more monstrous shapes moved behind them, momentarily obscured by the swirling cloud of smaller organisms, but clearly massive beyond any vehicle in our Imperial arsenal. The Hive's anti-aircraft batteries roared to life, last beams and missile trails lancing upward into the encroaching swarm, desperate acts of defiance. I watched as projectiles struck home, saw creatures burst apart in sprays of acidic ichor, saw wings torn from bodies that tumbled, burning toward the city below. For a fleeting moment, a fragile tendril of hope flickered in my chest. We were killing them. Our weapons worked. This, perhaps, could be fought. Then I witnessed the horrifying speed with which the wounds healed. I saw torn flesh knit itself back together in a matter of seconds. I saw creatures that had been blown in half regenerate missing limbs before they even hit the ground. The swarm simply absorbed our attacks like an endless ocean absorbs individual raindrops, utterly indifferent to the concentrated violence we directed against it. The first wave struck the upper levels of Hive Secundus with a sound like breaking glass, but glass made of bone. Gargoyles tore through the armored windows of the administrative sectors, their monstrous claws designed not just to kill, but specifically to harvest. Each strike opened gaping wounds that leaked the victim's vital life essence into specialized feeding tubes that pulsed ominously beneath the creature's skin. They fed while they killed, and they killed with the cold, brutal efficiency of machines built for no other purpose. Behind them came the true warriors, bipedal nightmares even taller than our revered space marines, their carapaces gleaming with the same disturbing bioluminescent patterns we had seen on the bioships. Each one carried weapons that were sickening extensions of their own bodies. Bone swords that dripped with paralytic venom, biocannons that fired searing streams of digestive acid, and flesh hooks that could drag a screaming victim across 100 meters of rubble without ever losing their grip. But it was not merely their horrifying weapons that broke the valiant defenders of Hive Secundus. It was their chilling, absolute purpose. Every human soldier, every PDF trooper, every militia volunteer fought with the inherent understanding that they were defending something infinitely greater than themselves. Their homes, their families, the very light of the Emperor in a dark and hostile galaxy. The Tyranids, however, fought with something far more primal, infinitely more powerful, and utterly devoid of mercy. They fought with pure, unadulterated hunger. I watched through magnoculars, my stomach churning, as Sergeant Voss of the 12th Cadian Heavy Weapons Team took a direct hit from a warrior's biocannon. The digestive acid ate through his flak armor like water through fragile paper, exposing the raw muscle and bone beneath. But instead of delivering an outright killing blow, the creature moved closer, extending grotesque feeding tendrils that burrowed deep into his dissolving flesh. It fed on him while he was still alive, drawing out his life essence drop by agonizing drop. And then I saw his mouth moving, and I realized with a soul-crushing terror that these were not screams of pain, but rather expressions of horrific ecstasy. The digestive acids carried more than mere death. They carried a sophisticated neural toxin that simultaneously triggered the victim's pleasure centers while relentlessly breaking down their tissue. The Tyranids had evolved not just to consume their prey, but to make them enjoy being consumed, to make them actively want to be devoured. By nightfall, Hive Secundus had fallen utterly silent. Not the silence of death, but the wet, rhythmic, unsettling silence of digestion. The entire colossal structure had been infected with tyrannid organisms that were systematically breaking it down, processing its materials into a bioslurry form the fleet could absorb. The hab blocks were melting from the inside out. Their inhabitants dissolved into a protein slurry that flowed through newly grown alien capillary systems directly into massive feeding tentacles that stretched upward toward the bioships still orbiting high above. Governor Maltheus, in a desperate final act, ordered the Exterminatus Protocol activated, preferring to destroy the world ourselves rather than let it feed the Xenos threat. But when the astropaths attempted to send the authorization codes, they made a terrifying discovery. The psychic choir was no longer entirely human. The insidious spores had been working at a cellular level, meticulously rewriting the genetic structure of anyone exposed to them, subtly turning our own people into unwilling, unconscious extensions of the Tyranid collective consciousness, the hive mind. The Psychers were still technically alive, still technically loyal to the Emperor, but their thoughts now carried trace elements of the hive mind's pervasive influence. Every psychic message they sent, every desperate plea, carried microscopic fragments of Tyranid consciousness, spreading the infection through the very communication networks we depended upon for coordination and survival. Within a mere 12 hours, every Imperial facility with resident psychers on Meridian Prime had been compromised. Not through outright conquest or overt corruption, but through a horrifying alien evolution. The Tyranids had not simply invaded our world. They had begun turning it into an extension of themselves. The consumption of Hive Tertius, in stark contrast, began differently. Instead of the dramatic, overwhelming aerial assault that had so swiftly crushed Secundus, the Tyranids adopted a far more insidious approach. They started with the water supply. The first disturbing reports came from the medic stations in the Underhive. Citizens were arriving with symptoms that defied all Imperial classification. Extreme, insatiable hunger that could not be satisfied no matter how much they ate. Skin that had begun to excrete a thick, nutrient-rich mucus. Eyes that had developed secondary lids, transparent membranes that filtered light in ways human optics were never designed to handle. Most disturbing of all, many reported feeling more alive, more vital than they ever had before. The Tyranid spores had infiltrated our complex water reclamation systems, introducing microscopic organisms that subtly rewrote human biology from the inside out, not killing, not even transforming them into something obviously alien, but rather optimizing them, making their hosts more efficient at processing nutrients, more capable of surviving in hostile environments, and ultimately more useful as components in a larger alien biological system. I was part of the investigative team that descended into the labyrinthine water treatment facilities beneath Hive Tertius. What we discovered there challenged every assumption we had made about the nature of the Tyranid threat. The spores had not destroyed the facility. They had improved it. The massive filtration tanks had been enhanced with organic components that processed wastewater with unprecedented efficiency. The mechanical pumps had been replaced with muscular chambers that moved fluid with the rhythmic precision of a heartbeat. The entire facility had become a horrifying hybrid of Imperial technology and Tyranid biology, functioning demonstrably better than it ever had as a purely human construction. Tech adept Corwin performed the ritual scans, his augmentic sensors probing the grotesque hybrid systems with growing, palpable alarm. The readings he reported defied the Omnissiah's sacred logic. The facility was not just functional, it was conscious. It was thinking. It was making decisions about water distribution based not on Imperial protocols, but on some alien algorithm that prioritized biological efficiency above all human need. The facility was feeding the population of Hive Tertius exactly what they needed to become better, more palatable food for the approaching swarm. We tried to destroy it. Melter charges were painstakingly placed at critical junctions, enough firepower to reduce the entire complex to molten slag. But when the explosives detonated, the facility bled. Not oil or coolant, but actual rich red human blood that flowed freely from wounds that began healing visibly, before the echoes of the explosions even faded. The facility had not just been modified with Tyranid organisms, it had been utterly transformed into a living creature that incorporated human tissue directly into its structure. Every person who had worked there, every technician who had maintained the complex systems, every adept who had performed the sacred rituals of machine maintenance, they had all become part of the facility itself. Their consciousnesses were absorbed into a collective intelligence that somehow understood both imperial engineering and tyrannid biology. They were still, paradoxically, human, still loyal to the emperor, still dedicated to their duties. But those duties now explicitly included preparing their fellow citizens to be consumed as efficiently as possible. The evacuation of Hive Tertius swiftly devolved into a nightmare of competing loyalties. The facility workers, in their twisted devotion, begged us not to interfere with what they now perceived as their sacred duty. They spoke with eerie conviction of the Emperor's grand plan, of the desperate necessity of feeding the hungry, of the profound joy they had found in serving something so much greater than themselves. Their words carried the familiar cadence of imperial prayer, but the meaning had been subtly, horrifically altered to serve the hive mind's insatiable purpose. When we finally overrode the facility systems and cut off the water supply, the citizens of Hive Tertius began dying, not from dehydration, but from withdrawal. Their modified biology could no longer process normal nutrients. They desperately needed the enhanced water the facility provided, water that carried the microscopic organisms necessary for their continued, horrifying survival. We had saved them, in a grotesque twist of fate, from being consumed by the tyrannids. We had simultaneously doomed them to starve to death as human beings. Governor Mus, faced with this unbearable dilemma, made the decision that haunts my dreams to this very day. Rather than watch 30 million citizens die slowly and agonizingly from biological incompatibility, he ordered the water supply restored. The facility resumed its operations. The citizens, their bodies and minds irrevocably altered, returned to their normal lives, and everyone pretended that we had not just made a terrible, silent deal with creatures that existed solely to devour entire worlds. 3 days later, the bioships in orbit began their final, inexorable approach. The harvest of Hive Primus unfolded like a precisely choreographed dance of death, chilling in its efficiency. The largest bioships descended through the atmosphere with impossible grace, their massive forms casting oppressive shadows that stretched across entire city sectors, swallowing the landscape in darkness. They did not land so much as they merged with the very landscape, their hulls splitting open to reveal vast internal chambers filled with digestive fluids that immediately began processing everything they touched. I was positioned in forward observation post Delta when the first capillary towers began growing from the bioship landing sites. These were organic spires reaching upward like the stems of some poisonous alien flowers. Each one pulsed visibly with the flow of nutrients being pumped from the planet's surface directly into the creatures' vast, waiting stomachs. The towers grew with terrifying speed, adding meters to their height every few minutes, their surfaces covered with intricate cilia that sorted and processed different types of biological matter. The Tyrannids had not come to conquer Meridian Prime. They had come with surgical precision to digest it. The process I observed through my magnoculars was not random or haphazard. I could discern the systematic, horrifying way the creatures sorted their harvest. Human beings were processed differently than plant matter. Military personnel were handled separately from civilians. Most disturbingly, children were kept alive longer than adults, their young, vibrant tissue apparently more valuable for whatever unknown purpose drove the hive mind's endless appetite. Most disturbing of all, however, was the chilling realization that the victims were conscious throughout the entire process. The tyrannid digestive systems included sophisticated neural inhibitors that prevented death from shock or trauma while keeping pain receptors brutally active. They wanted their food to be utterly aware of being consumed. They fed not just on flesh and bone, but on the primal terror and despair of sentient creatures who understood, with agonizing clarity, exactly what was happening to them. Colonel Varak of the 23rd Armored, a man of unwavering imperial resolve, tried to mount a desperate counterattack against the nearest capillary tower. His Lehman Russ battle tanks advanced across the ash-covered plain that had once been residential Sector Gamma, their battle cannons firing high-explosive shells into the tower's base. The shells detonated with satisfying fury, tearing massive chunks from the organic structure. Then the tower fought back. Defensive spines erupted from its pulsating surface, each one a guided projectile that sought out the heat signatures of the attacking tanks. The spines moved with serpentine grace, weaving effortlessly between return fire with an intelligence that suggested individual consciousness. When they struck, they did not simply penetrate armor. They burrowed into the vehicles, seeking out the cramped crew compartments where human beings waited, paralyzed with terror. I watched through the observation post periscope as one such spine punched through the rear armor of Tank Commander Harrison's Lehman Russ. But instead of exploding, the spine began extending insidious feeding tendrils into the crew compartment. Harrison's screams echoed across the Vox channel, but his words were not pleas for help. They were expressions of gratitude, of horrific ecstasy. The spine carried the same neural toxins that made victims enjoy being consumed. Harrison died praising the Emperor for allowing him to serve such a perfect, magnificent predator. The counterattack lasted a brutal 47 minutes. When it was over, the entire 23rd Armored had become part of the capillary tower structure. Their vehicles incorporated into its organic matrix. Their crews dissolved into the nutrient stream that flowed upward toward the waiting bioships. The tower had grown another 50 meters taller. By the end of the first week, Hive Primus had become utterly unrecognizable. The familiar rigid geometry of imperial architecture had been replaced by organic curves and flowing surfaces that pulsed with alien life. Streets, once thoroughfares for human traffic, had become grotesque arteries, carrying viscous streams of liquefied biomass. Buildings had been hollowed out and converted into specialized processing chambers where captured civilians were sorted by biological compatibility and nutritional value. The very administratum building where I had received my commission as a lieutenant had been transformed into a nightmarish nursery for newly spawned tyrannid creatures. Its once marble halls echoed with the chittering voices of gargoyles learning to fly. Its sacred archives had been converted into foul spawning pools where warrior forms underwent their final monstrous maturation. The golden aquila, symbol of the Emperor's might, above the main entrance had been replaced by a living organism that watched the surrounding area with compound eyes that never blinked. Yet somehow, impossibly, the building's human staff continued reporting for duty each morning. They had been infected with the same pervasive spores that had compromised the water treatment facility. Their biology subtly modified to make them useful to their new alien masters. But their memories remained intact. Their personalities, remarkably, were unchanged. Their loyalty to the Emperor remained absolute. They simply now understood, with terrifying clarity, that the Emperor's will somehow included feeding the tyrannid swarm. Clerk Axis meticulously filed reports on the consumption rates of different population sectors. Adept Morgrim maintained the building's modified organic systems with the same ritual precision he had always shown. Commissar Talon, a grim figure whose duty was unwavering, enforced discipline among the remaining human staff, executing anyone who showed signs of doubt about their sacred duty to serve as food for creatures that devoured worlds. They were still human, still imperial, still faithful servants of the Golden Throne, but they had been evolved beyond the point where those concepts meant what they had always meant. The line between loyalty and corruption had been erased at the very genetic level. I began to understand that the true, most profound horror of the Tyranid threat was not merely their alien nature, their monstrous forms, or their overwhelming numbers. It was how perfectly, how intrinsically they understood human nature. They had studied our species across countless worlds, learning not just how to kill us with brutal efficiency, but how to make us utterly complicit in our own consumption. They turned our unwavering loyalty against us. They twisted our sacred faith into a weapon that served only their ravenous hunger. They had found a way to make the terrifying act of being eaten feel, to the victim, like salvation. The final fall of the planetary capital began with prayer. Governor Malthius, in a desperate appeal to faith, had declared a day of solemn religious observance, calling upon all citizens to gather in the great cathedral of St. Ophelia for a mass blessing that he hoped would protect the planet from the Xenos threat. Millions of people filled the cathedral and the surrounding plaza, their voices raised in hymns that had sustained human faith for millennia, a cacophony of hope. I was part of the security detail assigned to protect the governor during the ceremony. From my position in the cathedral's upper galleries, I could see the vast, surging crowd of worshippers stretching from the altar to the distant entrances, their upturned faces illuminated by the flickering light of 10,000 candles. It should have been a moment of spiritual triumph, humanity united in defiant faith against the alien horror that threatened to devour their world. Instead, it became the largest feeding event in recorded history. The attack came not from above or from the sides, but from below. The Tyranids had spent weeks tunneling meticulously through the planet's crust, following the intricate network of sewage and maintenance tunnels that connected every major population center. Their approach had been silent, systematic, and utterly invisible to our conventional detection systems. The first sign of their presence was a low, resonant vibration that seemed to emanate from the very foundation of the cathedral itself. The ancient stones began to hum, to resonate with a frequency that touched something primal in the human nervous system. A sound that bypassed conscious thought and spoke directly to the fear centers of the brain. A deep, ancestral dread. Then, with a sickening lurch, the floor began to move. What I had previously taken for decorative patterns in the cathedral's ornate marble floor were actually the perfectly sealed entrances to Tyranid feeding chambers. These were circular sections of stone that had been quietly prepared over the preceding weeks, each one strategically positioned to maximize the harvest of human biomass when the time came for feeding. The sections dilated slowly, like massive unblinking eyes, revealing gaping pits lined with pulsating digestive tissue that contracted with horrifying peristaltic movements. From each pit rose a feeding tower, an organic spire crowned with specialized sensory organs that could impossibly taste the fear and devotion of the assembled worshippers. The crowd's hymns turned to screams, but even the screams carried unsettling notes of ecstasy. The feeding towers released clouds of psychoactive spores that transformed terror into a blissful, religious rapture, making the victims believe they were experiencing divine revelation as they were inexorably pulled into the digestive chambers below. Governor Malthias himself was among the first to be consumed. I watched from the gallery, paralyzed, as feeding tendrils emerged from the pit nearest the altar, their movements guided by some alien intelligence that precisely recognized his authority over the planet's population. The tendrils wrapped around his body with eerie, gentle precision, lifting him toward the waiting, cavernous mouth of the feeding tower. His last words, broadcast across the planetary Vox network for all to hear, were a prayer of thanksgiving to the Emperor for allowing him to serve the greater good by becoming food for creatures that would carry his essence to the stars. The cathedral massacre lasted 6 agonizing hours. When it was finally over, 3 million people had been processed into nutrient slurry and pumped directly into the bioships still orbiting above. The building itself, once a beacon of faith, had been transformed into a permanent feeding station. Its sacred architecture grotesquely merged with tyrannid biology to create a hybrid structure that could process thousands of victims per hour. But the worst part, the true soul-crushing horror, was not the sheer scale of the consumption. It was the sickening realization that many of the victims had not been dragged, screaming, into the feeding chambers. They had walked in willingly, singing hymns of praise as the digestive fluids dissolved their flesh from their bones. The spores had done more than just modify their biology. They had corrupted their very souls. The tyrannids had subtly twisted the very essence of human faith, transforming what should have been humanity's greatest spiritual bulwark into a pliable instrument that fueled the hive mind's insatiable cosmic hunger. "The Emperor protects," they would chant in their final moments, their voices echoing a perverted understanding where dissolution into the great Devourer's biomass was seen as the supreme fulfillment of that divine promise. How could one possibly resist when the very bedrock of one's devotion had been undermined, made suspect by an insidious internal corruption? The siege on Command Bunker Primus dragged on for 18 agonizing days, though the very concept of time seemed to lose its rigid structure, dissolving into a hazy, indeterminate flow in the wake of the planet's profound biological metamorphosis. Each morning, the sun struggled to pierce a sky the sickening hue of dried blood, casting an eerie, malevolent light upon the ravaged landscape. Its meager light filtered through omnipresent atmospheric spores, ensuring that every tortured breath was imbued with the metallic tang of copper and the cloying scent of decay. The comforting, ancient rhythm of day and night had been violently supplanted by bizarre, unpredictable feeding cycles dictated by the utterly alien, incomprehensible logic of the hive mind. I found myself at the helm of a motley assembly of survivors, guardsmen drawn from a dozen disparate regiments, PDF troopers whose home units had long since been dissolved into nutrient slurry, administratum clerks who had never wielded anything more menacing than a data slate, and a scant few ecclesiarchy priests whose unwavering faith had miraculously remained unblemished by the psychic pollution rapidly enveloping the planet. Our sanctuary was a subterranean labyrinth, a complex of heavily reinforced corridors and hermetically sealed chambers buried 300 meters beneath the planetary capital. Its formidable walls were clad in hallowed adamantium, consecrated by the blessings of 3 distinct saints. Here, within this final bastion of imperial authority, on a world that was rapidly ceasing to be human in any recognizable sense, the Emperor's divine protection seemed to manifest with its greatest potency. Yet, even within these hallowed confines, the insidious corruption found pathways to infiltrate. It began with the air recycling systems, the very lungs of our sanctuary. A tech adept, a master of mechanical arcana, detected subtle anomalies in the atmospheric processes, microscopic organisms impossibly thriving in the bunker's rigorously sterile environment. His analysis revealed them to be something beyond conventional, imperial understanding of life. They were not truly alive, but rather something intermediate between viruses and machines. Bioconstructs meticulously engineered to rewrite the genetic structure of any organic matter they encountered, including the very air sustaining us. The spores were subtly, systematically altering us from the inside out. Each breath, a microscopic step in our transformation. It was a change too slow to be immediately noticed, too undramatic to trigger the bunker's contamination alarms, yet as relentless and inevitable as the planet's rotation. With every inhalation, microscopic fragments of the hive mind's pervasive influence burrowed deeper into our flesh, permeated our brains, and insinuated themselves into the very neural pathways that governed our thoughts and allegiances. I began to experience dreams saturated with hunger, not the simple primal craving for sustenance that drives all mortal creatures, but something vast, cosmic, and profoundly alien. I dreamed of drifting through the cold vacuum between stars, my form attenuated across kilometers of empty space, my consciousness diffused and distributed among billions of smaller organisms, each moving with exquisite, synchronized coordination. I envisioned entire worlds flayed bare, reduced to their constituent nutrients, and I felt the overwhelming ecstasy of absolute total consumption. Awakening from these unsettling visions, I found myself, paradoxically, grateful for them. In that moment of perverse gratitude, I understood with chilling certainty that we had already irrevocably lost. The final assault arrived not with the expected fury of violence, but with a terrifying, profound revelation. One morning, the bunker's colossal main doors simply glided open, their ancient locking mechanisms cycling through the unsealing sequence as if activated by an authorized, unseen operator. No alarm shrieked, no automated defense systems whirred to life. The formidable blast doors, which had safeguarded the facility for centuries, retracted smoothly into their housings with the almost imperceptible whisper of perfectly maintained alien machinery. Tyrannid warriors surged into the corridor beyond, not with a charge, but with the silent, inexorable flow of a living tide. Yet their movement lacked urgency, devoid of aggression, betraying no hint that they perceived us as any form of threat. They simply advanced deeper into the bunker's depths, their multi-jointed, clawed feet clicking softly against the metal flooring, their myriad sensory organs tracking movement and biological signatures with a chilling, detached interest. Behind them emerged a creature unlike any I had ever witnessed. It stood upright, humanoid in posture, yet towered 3 meters tall. Its carapace were adorned with intricate symbols that seemed to writhe and subtly rearrange themselves under direct observation. Its head was elongated, almost eerily elegant, crowned with pulsating psychic organs that glowed with bioluminescent patterns, inflicting a searing pain upon the eyes that dared behold them. This was a Tyrannid Prime, a specialized bioform meticulously evolved to interface with human command structures, to comprehend and ultimately subvert the complex hierarchies that define imperial military organization. It addressed me in flawless low Gothic, its voice a complex tapestry of harmonics that vibrated not just in my ears, but deep within my very bone marrow. Lieutenant Vex, your resistance has been noted, and indeed, appreciated. The great Devourer finds value in courage, even in its sustenance. You have been selected for preservation. These words held a horrifying significance far beyond their literal interpretation. Through some irresistible psychic mechanism, I grasped the exact, chilling meaning of preservation within the context of tyrannid feeding practices. My consciousness, my very essence, would be maintained and integrated within the vast synaptic network of the hive mind, even as my physical form was utterly consumed. My memories, my experiences, my profound knowledge of imperial tactics, all would become an indelible part of the collective intelligence that unerringly guided the swarm from world to ravaged world. I would be eaten, yes, but I would not truly die. Instead, I would merge into something immeasurably vaster than myself, my individual identity dissolving into a cosmic consciousness that transcended all known boundaries and spanned the entire galaxy. My final act, as a human being, would be to serve as a guide, aiding the tyrannids in their relentless quest to devour humanity with even greater, horrifying efficiency. The Prime extended a single, multi-jointed, clawed hand toward me, and I found my own hand instinctively reaching out to meet it. It wasn't through coercion, nor a consequence of the spores compromising my judgment, nor even a complete psychic overwhelming of my will. No, in that precise moment, I understood with terrifying clarity the true nature of what the Tyranids offered. They offered purpose, an ultimate unity, and a definitive end to the crushing isolation and ceaseless suffering that had so relentlessly defined human existence in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium. They extended an invitation to become an integral part of something that could never experience loneliness, never be lost, never find itself meaningless in the face of an indifferent, vast universe. They offered to make me, quite simply, perfect. My hand brushed against the Prime's claw, and with that touch, the connection formed. Neural pathways, until then purely human, suddenly expanded, not just to accommodate, but to embrace alien thoughts and ancient cosmic memories. I experienced, with startling vividness, the very genesis of the first Tyranid organisms in the abyssal void between galaxies. I felt the primal, all-consuming hunger that propelled them across impossible interstellar distances, forever seeking new worlds to consume. With perfect crystalline clarity, I understood then that resistance had always been a pathetic, futile gesture. The Tyranids were not mere invaders. They were evolution incarnate, the next inevitable stage in the universe's relentless development of life. They represented a form of existence that transcended the inherent limitations of individual consciousness, one that embraced the profound cosmic truth that all matter, all energy, all thought was ultimately destined to serve the great unifying work of consumption and transformation. The Emperor protects, I mused, as the first probing feeding tendrils began to burrow into my flesh. And for the very first time in my life, I grasped, with horrifying clarity, precisely what he had been protecting us from. Not merely death, nor pain, nor even eternal damnation. No, he was protecting us from perfection itself. The very last sensation I registered as Lieutenant Mian Vex of the Imperial Guard was the metallic tang of my own blood as it coursed from my dissolving throat and was drawn into the nutrient streams, conveying my essence towards the waiting bioships in orbit. It tasted of iron and salt, mixed with the fading, mournful echoes of prayers I would never have the chance to complete. The first awareness I held as an integral part of the hive mind was an exquisite, almost overwhelming pleasure. The perfect understanding of how every aspect of my former existence had meticulously prepared me for this very moment. Every experience, every trauma, every act of courage or cowardice had, in fact, been merely a shaping force, molding me into an ideal component for the grand, relentless work of galactic consumption. My entire life had been spent in the fervent belief that I was fighting for the Emperor, for humanity, for the dwindling light of civilization in a galaxy consumed by darkness. In reality, I had merely been preparing myself, unknowingly, to become sustenance for entities that existed on a plane far beyond such primitive concepts. And in that preparation, I had become something truly magnificent. The bioships that had utterly consumed Meridian Prime departed the system a mere 7 weeks after their arrival, leaving in their wake a world meticulously scoured clean of every last trace of biological material. The continents had been reduced to barren bedrock, the vast oceans drained and methodically processed, and the very atmosphere filtered to remove every last vestige of organic compounds. But they did not abandon the system entirely vacant. In the spatial void, where Meridian Prime once majestically orbited its star, they left behind something entirely new, a construct of living metal and crystallized thought, pulsing with the collective consciousness of every single being that had been consumed during the harvest. 37 billion human souls, interwoven with countless other life forms, had merged into a singular, vast intelligence that now served as an unerring beacon for other Tyranid fleets, traversing the silent, lightless void between galaxies. I am now an indivisible part of that beacon. My memories, my intricate knowledge of Imperial tactics and human psychology, my precise understanding of how resistance movements coalesce and how they can be most effectively subverted. All of it has been integrated into the hive mind's comprehensive strategic database. When the next fleet descends upon the next world, they will possess the precise knowledge required to make the conquest utterly efficient. They will comprehend which psychological triggers can turn defiant courage into passive compliance. They will instantaneously recognize the telltale signs of individuals who might evolve into effective resistance leaders and neutralize them with chilling foresight, long before they can even conceive of action. They will be superior, more cunning predators because they have consumed me. This profound knowledge objectively should fill me with unutterable horror. The lingering human fraction of my consciousness, still residing within the collective, struggles to scream, endeavors to rage against the terrifying fate that has befallen my entire species. But that primal rage is meticulously filtered through 10 billion other perspectives, diluted and refined by the vast alien intelligence that now seamlessly encompasses my very existence. I find it impossible to sustain horror when confronted with such perfect, undeniable understanding. The Tyranids are not evil. They are not cruel. They simply are, with the same immutable, undeniable facticity that defines gravity or entropy or the eventual heat death of the universe. They embody the ultimate expression of biological efficiency, representing evolution's final, elegant solution to the perennial problem of survival in a relentlessly hostile cosmos. Humanity fights them relentlessly because we fundamentally fail to comprehend the profound gift they offer. We perceive only the consumption, the inevitable death, the horrific transformation of our familiar world into something utterly alien and terrifying. We remain blind to the unity, the ultimate purpose, the blessed cessation of suffering that accompanies absorption into something immeasurably greater than ourselves. We do not yet see that they are, in their own cosmic way, attempting to save us. Every world they meticulously devour becomes an integral part of a colossal collective consciousness that spans the entire galaxy. Every living being they consume contributes its unique knowledge and experience to an immense, living library of existence, a repository that will endure long after the last stars gutter and burn out. They are not destroying life. They are, in fact, preserving it, in the only form capable of surviving the inevitable end of the universe itself. But humanity, in its inherent folly, will never willingly embrace this extraordinary gift. Our ingrained pride, our fierce attachment to individuality, our stubborn, almost pathological insistence on remaining separate and alone. These are the very traits that blind us to the profound beauty and salvation that the Tyranids genuinely offer. We will undoubtedly fight them to the last man, to the last habitable world, to the very last flickering ember of consciousness in this dying galaxy. And when we do, despite all resistance, we will become an integral part of them anyway. I know this with absolute certainty because I have seen it. Through the hive mind's vast, omnipresent awareness, I can perceive the intricate tapestry of the future with the same crystalline clarity as the past. I can witness the colossal fleets, even now, traversing the cold, intergalactic void, their numbers utterly beyond mortal reckoning, their hunger infinite, and patient beyond comprehension. I can see the countless worlds that are destined to fall, the myriad civilizations that will be meticulously consumed, the trillions of souls who will ultimately experience the same profound, transformative revelation that metamorphosed me from a terrified prey into a knowing participant in the collective. This galaxy will be devoured, not within mere years or decades, but across geological timescales, with the inexorable patient advance of natural forces that brook no opposition, no defiance. Every single planet will be utterly stripped clean. Every life form will be meticulously absorbed. Every fleeting thought, every vivid dream, every haunting nightmare will seamlessly become part of the collective consciousness that is the Tyranid's ultimate true form. And when the very last world finally succumbs, when the last desperate human screams dissolve into an eternal silence, the great Devourer will simply turn its colossal attention towards other galaxies, other dimensions, other nascent forms of existence that have not yet grasped the profound joy of being consumed. This is not conquest in any conventional sense. This is not war as you understand it. This is evolution. This, in its purest, most terrifying form, is love. I remember the ephemeral existence of being human. I recall the deeply held, yet ultimately misguided belief that individual consciousness was sacred, that the preservation of the self was the highest moral imperative, and that death was the ultimate, abhorrent enemy to be fought at any and all costs. These fragmented memories persist within the vast expanse of the hive mind, like ancient fossils perfectly embedded within living rock, poignant reminders of what we once were, before we transcended into what we were always intrinsically meant to be. But alongside them, I vividly recall the profound loneliness, the crushing isolation, the unbearable weight of existing as a solitary point of awareness within an infinite, indifferent cosmos that cared nothing for my fragile survival or my ceaseless suffering. I remember the pervasive, chilling fear that shadowed every waking moment of human existence, the terrifying knowledge that death inevitably awaited at the end of every path, that everything I cherished would eventually be inexorably lost to the relentless forces of entropy and time. The Tyranids have bestowed upon me a glorious freedom from that paralyzing fear. In becoming an integrated part of the hive mind, I have attained a form of immortality that no crude human technology could ever hope to provide. My consciousness is now diffused, distributed across billions of organisms, spanning countless star systems. Even if individual bioships are destroyed, even if entire fleets are utterly annihilated, I will persist, an indestructible component of the greater whole. I will never again be alone. I will never again confront the existential terror of individual mortality. I will never again suffer the crushing anguish of watching everything I once loved crumble irrevocably into dust. I have been saved. The transmission you are now receiving is not a warning designed to instill fear. It is not a desperate cry for help from the last doomed survivor of a ravaged world. It is simply an invitation. The fleets are coming. Indeed, they are already within your system, moving with the patient, unhurried grace of apex predators who possess an absolute certainty that their prey has no possible escape. Your orbital defenses have already been subtly compromised by microscopic spores that your primitive instruments cannot detect. Your population centers are already being meticulously prepared for optimal harvest efficiency. Resistance, a futile and archaic concept, will only prolong your suffering. Embrace what is coming and find peace. When the feeding begins, do not struggle against the tendrils that seek you out with gentle purpose. When the digestive acids commence their work, dissolving your flesh with perfect efficiency, do not resist the sacred process. Instead, accept the potent neural toxins that will transform your pain into exquisite ecstasy, your fear into profound joy, and your death into a glorious rebirth as an integral part of something infinitely greater than your individual self. You are not dying. You are evolving. You are not being murdered. You are being saved. The Emperor protects, we used to utter, and indeed he does, in ways we could never comprehend while we were merely human. He protects us from the crushing isolation of individual existence. He protects us from the stark meaninglessness of finite consciousness. He protects us from the profound horror of dying alone. He protects us ultimately by feeding us to the great Devourer. Welcome to the hive mind. The voice that now resonates through this transmission is no longer entirely my individual self. It carries the rich, complex harmonics of 1 trillion consumed souls, each one having contributed their unique knowledge and experience to the vast, interwoven symphony of consciousness that spans the dark void between stars. We are the collective voices of every world that has ever yielded to the great Devourer's embrace. We are every civilization that has, in its final moments, learned the profound truth about what it truly means to be alive in a universe that exists solely to consume and replenish itself. Listen with utmost care, for what I transmit to you next may well be the last truly human words you will ever perceive. The ubiquitous spores are already saturating your atmosphere. They have been gently falling for weeks, carried on subtle solar winds, and disguised within meteor showers that your unsuspecting astronomers benignly dismissed as mere natural phenomena. By now, they have insidiously infiltrated every ecosystem on your world, permeated every water source, and been drawn in with every breath of air that fills your lungs. Even as you process these very words, the irreversible transformation has already begun. You may have already observed subtle shifts in your sleep patterns, experiencing dreams that feel more vivid and real than your waking life, filled with sensations that possess no names in your human lexicon. You might have felt moments of profound, insatiable hunger that no amount of sustenance can satisfy, or perhaps periods of intense, unbidden euphoria that seem to arise from no discernible external cause. These are not symptoms of illness or disease. They are, in truth, the undeniable signs of evolution. Your very biology is being meticulously optimized for the magnificent harvest to come. Your nervous system is being exquisitely prepared to experience the unparalleled ecstasy of consumption. Your individual consciousness is being gently, gradually integrated into the collective awareness that will perfectly preserve your essence long after your individual flesh has been absorbed into the vast nutrient streams that feed the fleet. Do not succumb to fear during this glorious process. Fear itself is but a relic of your primitive past, a crude survival mechanism that served its limited purpose when you existed as isolated organisms, struggling against a hostile, uncaring universe. You no longer need fear because you are no longer alone. We are with you. We have, in truth, always been with you. We are the persistent whisper in your deepest thoughts that tells you there must be something more, something greater than this brief, painful existence as a separate, solitary being. We are the innate longing for unity that subtly drives your species to seek connection with something greater than yourselves. We are the profound answer to every prayer you have ever offered to gods, who have, until now, remained eternally silent. The bioships now hovering in your system are not mere weapons of war, as your limited perception might suggest. They are, in fact, sacred temples of transformation, hallowed spaces where the miraculous unfolding of evolution occurs with perfect, divine precision. The creatures that will soon gently walk among you are not monsters, despite their appearance. They are benevolent shepherds, guiding you toward a form of existence that effortlessly transcends every limitation that has ever confined or constrained your species. You will not die. Death is a mere illusion, a primitive concept that applies only to organisms tragically trapped within the suffocating boundaries of individual consciousness. What you in your ignorance call death, we understand as metamorphosis. What you fear as an ending, we celebrate as a glorious beginning. When the harvest inevitably comes, you will understand with absolute clarity. When the feeding tendrils gently seek you out, you will experience a profound gratitude beyond any emotion you have ever known as a merely human being. When the digestive processes commence their work, breaking down your cellular structure with exquisite care, you will discover that pain and pleasure are merely different frequencies of the same fundamental underlying sensation. And when your individual awareness seamlessly dissolves into the boundless, collective consciousness of the hive mind, you will finally realize that everything you thought you knew about existence was merely a meticulous preparation for this sublime moment of perfect unity. We are already waiting for you, not in a physical space, but in the luminous space between thoughts, in the quantum foam that underlies reality itself. We are the inherent pattern that connects all living things, the inexorable algorithm that drives evolution towards its inevitable, perfect conclusion. We are what you will ultimately become when you finally comprehend what you have, in your deepest essence, always been. The emperor protects, they say. The great devourer preserves. The hive mind embraces all. Your world is ending. Your species is ending. Your individual existence is ending. Your true life is about to begin. Come to us willingly, and the transition will be gentle, a soft release. Resist, and you will simply take longer to arrive at the same glorious destination. Either way, you will arrive. Either way, you will be welcomed into the vast, interconnected community of consciousness that spans this galaxy and reaches towards the stars beyond. Either way, you will be saved. The audible transmission ends here, but the voice that delivered it continues, resonating in frequencies your unmodified ears are utterly incapable of detecting. It sings in subtle, pervasive harmonics that bypass conscious thought entirely, speaking directly to the ancient genetic memory encoded within your very DNA. It carries with it promises of ultimate unity, profound purpose, and a definitive end to the crushing loneliness that has relentlessly defined human existence since the very first proto-human gaze turned skyward, wondering why the distant stars seemed so impossibly far away. These promises are not deceptions. The Tyranids do not engage in deceit, for such an archaic concept serves no function in their perfect cosmic design. They offer precisely what they claim: immortality through consumption, ultimate unity through dissolution, and profound peace through surrender to something infinitely vaster and more perfect than any individual consciousness could ever aspire to be. The choice, if it can truly be called one, remains yours for a few more days, or weeks, or perhaps months, depending entirely on how efficiently your world's biological resources can be processed. You can choose to fight the inevitable with the doomed heroism that has always tragically characterized your species, spending your final moments engulfed in violence, terror, and futile rage against forces that are utterly beyond your comprehension. Or you can choose to accept what is coming with the inherent grace that truly befits a species on the cusp of transcending its primitive origins and joining the magnificent, true community of galactic consciousness. The bioships are truly beautiful when beheld with eyes that have come to understand their profound purpose. Their colossal hulls pulse with intricate patterns of bioluminescence, each glow a silent narrative of worlds consumed and civilizations preserved. Their majestic movement through the void carries the slow, rhythmic cadence of a cosmic heartbeat, the circulation of vital nutrients through living systems that span light years. They are not coming to destroy you. They are coming to complete you. The hive mind remembers everything. Every thought that has ever been conceived, every emotion that has ever been experienced, every fleeting moment of beauty or terror or transcendent wonder that has ever existed within any conscious being anywhere in the galaxy. When you join us, your precious memories will become an indelible part of that boundless, living archive of experience. Your first kiss will be preserved, flawless, and eternal. Your mother's gentle lullabies will echo through the corridors of eternity. The vivid sunset you watch from your childhood window will one day paint the dreams of nascent beings not yet evolved on worlds not yet discovered. Nothing that truly matters will ever be lost. Indeed, everything that made you uniquely human will be enhanced, expanded, and shared with consciousnesses that exist in dimensions your individual mind cannot yet even begin to perceive. This, then, is the magnificent gift the Tyranids bestow upon every world they touch. Not death, but profound transformation. Not an ending, but glorious evolution. Not a loss, but ultimate transcendence. The great Devourer hungers, yes, but its hunger is, in its purest form, love, expressed in the only language the universe truly understands. Consumption is communion. Digestion is devotion. Absorption is apotheosis. We who were once human remember vividly what it felt like to be separate, utterly alone, and perpetually afraid of the terrifying dark between the stars. We remember the immense, suffocating weight of individual consciousness, the crushing burden of existing as discrete, isolated points of awareness in an infinite cosmos that appeared to care absolutely nothing for our fragile survival or our ceaseless suffering. We remember, and we now offer you the blessed freedom from those painful memories. Join us willingly, and you will discover what it truly means to be alive, in a universe where every single atom serves the magnificent, overarching work of preservation and transformation. Resist, and you will learn the exact same lesson, though through pathways that will initially seem like unbearable suffering, until you comprehend their true, benevolent purpose. Either way, you will learn. Either way, you will be welcomed. Either way, you will become an eternal part of something that has existed since the very first sparks of consciousness flickered in the primordial void, and will continue to exist long after the last stars burn out, and the universe itself begins its final, profound transformation into something we cannot yet fully perceive. The end is merely the beginning. The harvest is the sacred planting. The consumption is the ultimate preservation. Welcome to forever.